June 1943, Camp Aliceville, Alabama. The corrugated steel roof of Barracks 7B reflected the southern sun as Oberfeldwebel Kurt Pechmann stepped from the transport truck, his legs stiff after the three-day journey from Norfolk. The American MP gestured toward a row of wooden buildings stretching across manicured grounds. Pechmann squinted, confused. This couldn't be a prison camp. The neat rows of identical structures with glass windows, electric lighting visible even in daylight, and paved pathways between buildings contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had prepared him for. Showers are that way, the guard pointed casually. Hot water runs until 2200 hours. Pechmann, captured in Tunisia just 23 days earlier, had expected primitive cages, not this campus-like facility with running water and electricity. His confusion deepened when he entered the barracks: polished wooden floors, spaced bunks with actual mattresses, electric bulbs overhead, and most shocking, a radiator for winter heating. The bathrooms contained flush toilets, not the latrine trenches his Feldwebel training had promised in American captivity. Across America that summer, 372,846 German prisoners of war were experiencing the same cognitive dissonance in 511 newly constructed camps. These prisoners, veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps and U-boat crews who had terrorized Allied shipping, discovered an America that rendered Nazi caricatures absurd. The industrial capacity required to build these standardized facilities, each camp constructed in under 90 days, represented production capability beyond anything Germany had achieved even before war rationing. Camp Aliceville alone housed 6,000 prisoners in 400 buildings, consuming enough lumber to build 650 American homes, with 9.6 miles of internal roads and 5.5 miles of sewer lines, all constructed specifically for enemy prisoners, not German citizens. The electrical system delivered 2,300 volts transformed to residential current, providing lighting equal to American military barracks and superior to most German civilian housing. The water purification system processed 150,000 gallons daily, ensuring every prisoner received clean water at American public health standards. As prisoners explored their new environment, they documented the contradictions in letters home, letters that military censors found revealing not for military information, but for their astonishment at American resources. In one intercepted letter, a former tank commander wrote, "The Americans build prison camps with better facilities than our labor camps have for German workers. Their carelessness with materials, using new lumber where we would use scavenged boards, reveals resources we cannot match." The Geneva Convention required adequate housing for prisoners, but what the Americans considered adequate exceeded middle-class German civilian standards. The physical reality of these camps delivered the first psychological blow to Nazi indoctrination. As a Wehrmacht officer later testified, "We were told Americans were soft, disorganized, and incapable of sacrifice. Yet they diverted construction materials during wartime to build proper facilities for enemies. This contradiction was our first education." Within weeks, Camp Aliceville's organized activity schedule, including sports fields with proper equipment, recreation halls with radios, and classroom spaces for education programs, further demolished Nazi claims. While German civilians faced increasing deprivation, German prisoners encountered systematic evidence of American industrial democracy. This physical environment, constructed with casual efficiency, began unraveling the psychological edifice of Nazi superiority long before formal re-education efforts began. The material reality of America was proving more persuasive than any propaganda film. July 1943. Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Hauptmann Wilhelm Godek watched with disbelief as the American camp commander consulted with the elected German prisoner spokesman about recreation schedules. This simple exchange, a military officer discussing arrangements with a prisoner representative, contradicted everything Godek understood about military hierarchy. In Nazi Germany, prisoners existed to be commanded, not consulted. Yet here, the American captain nodded thoughtfully at suggestions from a Wehrmacht sergeant about baseball field usage times. The organizational structure of American prison camps systematically dismantled Nazi concepts of authority. Unlike German military's rigid stratification, American camps operated with a flexibility that maintained order while acknowledging prisoner dignity. The Geneva Convention required POWs to be granted military courtesies according to rank, but Americans extended this into a framework that recognized basic human rights regardless of status. Enlisted men received the same food quality, medical care, and male privileges as officers, a democratic standard, shocking to men from a system where privation flowed downward through the hierarchy. Camp records from 1943 to 1945 document the processing of 15.3 million pieces of mail to and from German prisoners, uncensored except for security concerns, allowing free expression of thoughts impossible in Nazi Germany. Each prisoner could send an average of 3 letters and 4 postcards monthly, creating conduits of unfiltered information flowing into the Reich. Army Postal Service allocated 147 censors to POW mail, focused on preventing escape plans rather than suppressing opinions, another democratic concept alien to totalitarian understanding. Camp newspapers, printed on American presses with minimal oversight, circulated among prisoners with content created by Germans themselves. Fort Campbell's Lagerpost reached 3,000 readers weekly, including articles debating camp conditions and even criticizing meal preparation, criticism without punishment, and incomprehensible freedom to men raised under Gestapo surveillance. When Standenführer Johann Seiler, an SS officer captured in France, confronted a black American MP in August 1943, his worldview fractured visibly. His Wehrmacht companions watched as Seiler refused orders from the guard, declaring, "I don't take orders from Untermenschen." The measured response, restriction of canteen privileges for 2 weeks rather than physical punishment, demonstrated American discipline through rules rather than terror. More shocking, the black sergeant had legitimate authority backed by institutional power, a direct contradiction of Nazi racial doctrine that placed Aryans at the pinnacle of humanity. By fall 1943, camp social organization had created fissures in Nazi solidarity. Captain Theodor Kramer, overseeing Camp Carson, documented the voluntary segregation of prisoners. The Germans are separating themselves, moderates avoiding hardline Nazis, creating their own barracks communities where they can speak freely. This internal democracy, prisoners governing their relationships through choice rather than force, revealed American values without explicit indoctrination. The democratic order of American camps operated not through ideological lectures but through daily demonstration. Prisoner committees elected representatives. Complaints received formal responses. Regulations applied equally to everyone. Mail flowed freely. Information remained uncensored. This lived experience of democratic principles, fairness, representation, equality before rules, quietly undermined years of Nazi indoctrination more effectively than any propaganda campaign. The contrast between remembered authoritarianism and experienced democracy created cognitive dissonance that no ideological defense could resolve. The system itself became the most effective teacher. Spring 1944, McLean County, Illinois. Former panzer mechanic Ernst Weber stood in a cornfield, watching the farmer whose land he worked adjust the tractor's carburetor. The American had shown him how to operate the machine that morning, then paid him the standard POW wage, 80 cents per day, deposited to his camp account. Weber had worked 14-hour days in the Wehrmacht motor pool without extra compensation. Here, as a prisoner, he received both fair payment and a canteen token for cold lemonade during his mid-morning break. The Geneva Convention permitted POW labor but prohibited work directly supporting war efforts. By 1944, 95.6% of able-bodied German prisoners participated in the War Department's labor program. They maintained military bases, harvested crops, staffed canneries, cleared forests, and built roads. Their contribution to the American economy reached $131 million, $2.1 billion in modern value, with 600,000 man-days of agricultural labor in Illinois alone preventing crop losses during severe labor shortages. Unlike forced laborers in German factories who received minimal rations and harsh punishment, German POWs in America worked under the same safety regulations protecting American civilians. Records from the War Department's Provost Marshal General's office documented standard working conditions: 8-hour days, 10-minute breaks each hour, 30-minute lunch periods, safety equipment requirements identical to civilian standards. At Camp Clark, Missouri, when temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit in July 1944, outdoor work details received mandatory rest periods and salt tablets, treatment German overseers would never have provided foreign workers. Former infantry lieutenant Karl Meyer recalled in a 1977 interview, "Working alongside American farmers taught me more about democracy than any lecture could. The farmer consulted me about the best way to repair his barn roof. He valued my expertise despite my being his enemy." This respect for individual knowledge, regardless of rank or nationality, contradicted everything National Socialism had taught about natural hierarchies. The payment system itself delivered powerful lessons. The 80-cent daily wage, later raised to $1.20, allowed prisoners to purchase personal items at camp canteens. This economic agency, controlling one's own money, making purchasing decisions, contrasted sharply with the Nazi command economy. A day's wages bought 7 candy bars, 16 bottles of Coca-Cola, or 3 packs of American cigarettes, small luxuries representing freedom of choice unavailable to German civilians under increasingly severe rationing. In California agricultural regions, German prisoners harvested oranges alongside Mexican braceros and American women. This direct exposure to America's diverse workforce shattered propaganda images of racial segregation. Wehrmacht Corporal Friedrich Berger noted in his diary, "We work beside Mexicans who earn 3 times our wages but treat us as equals during lunch breaks. They share their tortillas while we share our camp-baked bread. The Americans supervise all of us with the same expectations for quality and the same respect for rest periods." The labor program unintentionally exposed prisoners to American technical superiority. German engineers assigned to road construction witnessed machinery that outpaced German equivalents, bulldozers moving more earth hourly than German equipment could move daily. Agricultural prisoners saw mechanical harvesters performing work that required platoons of laborers in German fields. Factory workers observed production techniques that achieved in hours what German methods required days to complete. Through this daily labor, German prisoners experienced America's approach to work: fair compensation, safety protections, efficiency through mechanization, respect for expertise, and equal treatment. Each workday delivered empirical evidence against Nazi claims of American degeneracy. The proof wasn't in speeches, but in paychecks, in safety measures, in respectful treatment, tangible experiences that transformed enemies into reluctant admirers of the system they had been sent to destroy. November 1944. Camp Concordia, Kansas. Former Luftwaffe navigator Hans Gwenther hesitated before the library shelves containing 6,328 volumes, more books than his hometown library in Dresden had held before the war. His fingers traced the spine of Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, a work banned in Germany since 1933. Next to it sat Remarks All Quiet on the Western Front, its pages unmarred by Nazi censors' black ink. These books, freely available to prisoners, represented intellectual freedom unimaginable under the Reich. American prison camps established educational systems of remarkable scope, transforming barracks into classrooms and guards into logistic supporters for prisoner-led learning. By winter 1944, these programs had expanded beyond basic literacy to include university-level courses taught by prisoner professors. Camp Concordia's education director, a captured physics professor from Heidelberg, oversaw 167 courses ranging from English language to advanced mathematics, engineering to philosophy, each representing knowledge unconstrained by Nazi ideology. The statistics reveal the program's scale: 563,921 textbooks distributed, 93,941 German prisoners enrolled in at least one course, 6,148 receiving university credit arranged through international agreements with Swiss educational authorities. The American Library Association coordinated donations, providing camps with scientific journals, technical manuals, and literary classics, many unavailable in Germany due to political censorship. The YMCA supplemented these collections, contributing an additional 227,000 books by 1945. At Camp Hearn, Texas, Lieutenant Walter Koch discovered music theory texts that presented jazz as legitimate art rather than degenerate noise, as Nazi cultural ministers had described it. The camp's makeshift orchestra incorporated these forbidden rhythms into performances attended by prisoners and guards alike. The 79 original compositions created by prisoner musicians at Hearn documented this cross-cultural transformation, with German classical structures incorporating American syncopation. The contrast with Nazi intellectual control emerged starkly. Where German universities had purged un-German thinking, camp education programs encouraged critical inquiry. Where the Reich had burned books, American camps provided them freely. Where Nazi education demanded ideological conformity, American programs fostered independent thought. This intellectual freedom, the ability to question, to explore, to evaluate evidence, represented democracy's cognitive foundation. Former Hitler youth leader Otto Werner later described his educational awakening. "I discovered that mathematics worked the same whether taught by Nazis or Americans. This simple fact that truth exists independent of ideology began my questioning. If they had lied about science, what else had they fabricated? When I read newspapers describing German cities being captured, information matching what American officers told us unofficially, I realized we had been systematically deceived about the war itself." Technical training programs demonstrated American pragmatism. Camp Clinton, Mississippi offered 23 vocational courses: automotive repair, electrical wiring, carpentry, plumbing, focusing on skills rather than ideology. The 1,847 German prisoners who completed Clinton's technical certification program gained practical knowledge along with democratic exposure. The program emphasized problem-solving approaches over hierarchical command structures, teaching prisoners to think rather than merely obey. Art classes flourished, producing 12,573 documented works by prisoner artists. The Smithsonian's 1945 exhibition of selections from this collection, landscapes, portraits, abstract experiments, demonstrated creative freedom impossible under regimes requiring art to serve propaganda purposes. The exhibition catalogue noted, "These works reveal prisoners discovering individual expression after years of collective conformity." For men raised in a system that criminalized independent thought, American educational freedom delivered the war's most profound revelation: that knowledge needn't serve the state, that truth existed beyond political necessity, that intellectual curiosity represented not weakness, but strength. This cognitive liberation, more than any physical comfort, convinced thoughtful prisoners that the American system, however imperfect, surpassed what they had left behind. February 1945. Fort Kearny, Rhode Island. Former Wehrmacht Lieutenant Joseph Berger stared at the projector screen, watching American troops liberate Buchenwald concentration camp. The emaciated bodies, stacked like cordwood, contradicted everything he had believed about his homeland. As lights rose in the classroom, he noticed tears on the cheeks of men who had once proudly worn swastikas. The American captain supervising the session spoke softly, "This is why we fight, not against the German people, but against this." The Special Projects Division, established by the Provost Marshal General's office on October 19, 1944, represented America's formal effort to transform German prisoners through democratic re-education. Unlike Nazi indoctrination, which demanded unquestioning acceptance, the American program operated through factual presentation, intellectual persuasion, and voluntary participation. Colonel Edward Davidson, the Harvard-educated officer who designed the program, insisted, "We don't want converts to democracy, we want men convinced by evidence that democracy offers superior outcomes." The methodology reflected democratic values. Each camp classified prisoners into 3 categories based on political sympathy: white, anti-Nazi; gray, neutral; and black, committed Nazis. The classifications, documented in detailed records, showed the distribution: 25% white, 55% grey, 20% black. Rather than punishing those categorized as black, the program isolated committed Nazis while focusing resources on the majority capable of reconsideration. Fort Kearny's Special Re-Education School, housed in a former Coast Guard facility, processed 1,252 carefully selected prisoners between March and December 1945. The curriculum encompassed world history, democratic theory, and American cultural studies, but its most powerful component was factual information about Nazi atrocities. Prisoners viewed 16 films of concentration camps, examined authenticated photographs of mass executions, and read transcripts of Nuremberg testimony. For many, this represented their first unfiltered access to the regime's realities. The German prisoner newspaper Der Ruf, The Call, first published on March 30, 1945, reached a circulation of 11,000 copies distributed across the camp system. Edited by prisoners selected for democratic sympathies, the publication offered factual war reporting, cultural analysis, and critical examination of Nazi ideology. Unlike heavy-handed propaganda, Der Ruf presented evidence and encouraged readers to form their own conclusions, a journalistic approach impossible under totalitarianism. Former SS officer Heinrich Müller, who arrived at Fort Kearny classified as black, described his transformation in a 1976 interview. "I believed America would force democracy upon us like we forced National Socialism on occupied territories. Instead, they presented evidence and allowed us to question. The American officer supervising our discussions never demanded agreement. He answered our challenges with facts rather than punishment." This respect for intellectual integrity, treating even enemies as thinking beings rather than objects for indoctrination, revealed democratic strength I hadn't believed existed. The psychological shift accelerated as Germany's military collapse became undeniable. By April 1945, with Soviet forces in Berlin and American troops crossing the Rhine, even committed Nazis confronted the system's catastrophic failure. Corporal Wilhelm Hoffmann, who had joined the Hitler Youth at age 10, wrote in his journal, "The Americans could have treated us harshly as revenge. Instead, they showed us films of our leaders' crimes, then asked what kind of Germany we wanted to build. This approach, accountability without humiliation, makes their system stronger than ours." The Special Projects Division's records document this transformation. 95% of prisoners exposed to the program acknowledged factual evidence of Nazi atrocities. 87% expressed willingness to participate in democratic reconstruction. 79% rejected continuing Nazi ideology. These weren't merely diplomatic responses to captors. The program's effectiveness would be proven after repatriation, when former prisoners became democracy's strongest advocates in occupied Germany. Through methodical education rather than forced conversion, America demonstrated democracy's fundamental premise that truth, freely examined by thinking individuals, would triumph over falsehood. The Special Projects Division succeeded not through coercion, but through respect for human intellect, convincing enemies that democracy couldn't be defeated because it aligned with reality rather than requiring its distortion. Spring 1946. Bremen Harbor, Germany. Former Afrika Korps Sergeant Karl-Heinz Weber stepped off the repatriation ship into a homeland transformed beyond recognition. The once proud city lay in ruins, with 60.7% of its buildings destroyed. As American MPs processed his release papers, Weber clutched the single suitcase containing his American possessions, English-language textbooks, technical manuals, and a signed baseball from the camp team. These artifacts from captivity would become tools for rebuilding a shattered nation. Between May 1945 and June 1946, 372,000 German prisoners returned from American camps to a defeated Germany. These men, transformed by their experience, arrived as democracy's unlikely ambassadors. Unlike those held in Soviet captivity, who returned broken by forced labor and starvation, American-held prisoners arrived healthier than when captured, carrying not just physical strength, but ideological transformation back to their devastated homeland. The contrast proved jarring. Former Luftwaffe pilot Hans Schroeder, repatriated to Munich in July 1946, found his family subsisting on 1,100 calories daily, less than half his American prison rations. His father, once a Nazi Party official, had been reduced to scavenging ruins for firewood. Schroeder's American camp education certificate in electrical engineering secured him immediate employment with the occupation authorities, beginning a career that would eventually place him among the architects of German electrical grid reconstruction. Statistical evidence reveals the former POWs' outsized impact. By 1955, veterans of American captivity held 17% of elected municipal positions in West Germany's 5 largest states, despite representing only 3.8% of the eligible male population. These officials, shaped by democratic exposure, constructed governance systems mirroring American institutional safeguards rather than authoritarian efficiency. The Bavarian town council system, adopted in 1947, drew explicit inspiration from prisoner experiences with camp representative committees. Werner Krebs, captured at Normandy and held at Camp Bowie, Texas, returned to become mayor of Darmstadt, 1952 to 1964, where he implemented transparent budgeting processes he had observed in American camp administration. Under his leadership, Darmstadt's reconstruction prioritized public housing with indoor plumbing and electrical service, amenities he had first experienced as an American prisoner. His autobiography credits his captivity. In America, I learned that prosperity need not come at others' expense. Their system created abundance through production rather than conquest. The economic miracle of post-war Germany drew direct inspiration from American models. Former POW Ludwig Erhard, who would become economics minister in 1949, developed currency reform and anti-monopoly regulations based on observations from captivity. The 231 former prisoners who joined his ministry brought first-hand knowledge of American regulatory frameworks, helping construct Germany's social market economy, a system balancing free enterprise with social welfare. Former Wehrmacht Colonel Alfred Drexel established Germany's first management consulting firm in 1950, applying organizational methods he had studied while working in Camp Robinson's administration office. His firm trained 7,300 German executives in American business practices between 1950 and 1960, emphasizing merit-based promotion over hierarchy, quality control over production quotas, and customer satisfaction over state requirements. Today, German democratic institutions reflect lessons learned by prisoners who experienced America's systematic demonstration of democratic principles. The constitutional court system, press freedoms, and federalized governance all bear imprints from this unlikely transmission of values. Enemies returned as admirers, building their former adversaries' system in their homeland's ruins. What began as military defeat transformed into ideological victory. America conquered not through force but through demonstration, convincing enemies by showing rather than telling. Former POW and noted economist Wilhelm Röpke expressed this transformation most clearly in his 1953 speech to the German Industrial Association. Germany's darkest hour became its greatest opportunity. Through American captivity, thousands of us discovered that prosperity and freedom are not opposing forces, but essential partners. We learned that a society succeeding through voluntary cooperation, rather than coerced compliance, creates not just material wealth, but human dignity. This lesson, learned behind prison wire, has built the free Germany rising from our nation's ashes. The German prisoners, who realized America's way of life couldn't be beaten, became the most effective builders of democracy in post-war Europe, transforming military defeat into civilizational renewal. Their story demonstrates history's most profound truth, that lasting victory comes not from subjugation, but from persuasion, not through conquest, but through conversion.